Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. In this episode, we discuss a topic that challenges conventional wisdom, the surprising health benefits of later age pregnancy. While many discussions around parenting focus on the challenges of having children later in life, new research suggests that giving birth in your late 30s, 40s, or even beyond may come with unexpected health advantages for both parents and children. As someone who became a first-time father in my early 40s, I've experienced firsthand how later age parenting shapes physical health, emotional resilience, and even cognitive longevity. My co-host, Corbin, is in his early 30s and on his own path to parenthood, giving us two different perspectives on this fascinating topic. We'll explore findings from recent research studies that suggest a link between later age and a longer lifespan, improved brain function, and a lower risk of cognitive decline. We'll also discuss the social and financial benefits of waiting to have children, as well as the challenges and considerations that come with it. So whether you're a parent thinking about starting a family or just curious about how age, reproduction, and longevity intersect, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. So, Corbin, today we're diving into something that's becoming more common in today's society, having children later in life. As you know, my wife, Pam, and I had our son, Liam, when we were in our early 40s. And so I've kind of lived this experience firsthand.
And my wife and I, we're in our early 30s. Well, me in my mid 30s. She's in her early 30s. So while we haven't had kids yet, it's definitely something that we talk about.
So Pam shared an article with me recently titled "The Surprising Health Benefits Linked to Having a Baby at 35 and Older." And it shed some light on some unexpected advantages to having later age pregnancies.
It's interesting that my generation is trending towards waiting to have kids, yet the common perception is waiting comes with certain risks. And what are some of the key takeaways from this article?
Yeah, that's always been, that was our concern when we were trying to get pregnant when we first got married, because we got married late. It was that, that there's a much more increased risk of Down syndrome and all these different things that come with having later pregnancies. And so, there tends to be a lot more concerns for individuals who are looking to start families a little bit later in life. And apparently it isn't as concerning as we have kind of been led to believe. So one of the key takeaways is that women who give birth later in life may experience increased longevity, which I think is pretty cool. And it's not just a speculation. There's scientific research to support this.
Yeah, it really stood out to me. The article mentions the studies have found a correlation between later age pregnancies and longer telomeres. For the viewers and listeners who might not be familiar with telomeres, what are these?
Well, telomeres are the protective caps at the ends of our DNA strands. Longer the telomeres, that tends to be linked with a better cellular health and even longer health span. So think of the telomeres as those little plastic tips on the shoelaces. I'm kind of reminded of the show Phineas and Ferb. I don't know if you watched Phineas and Ferb. That was one of the shows that, the kids used to watch a lot growing up. And I actually kind of liked the show, but there was one episode where they did this whole song and dance about aglets. Term aglets. Nobody knows what those little ends on the shoelaces are called. We always just kind of, those little tips of the shoelaces are actually called aglets, for your information. So
Yep.
If you do have kids later, when they ask you what the end of your shoelace is called, it's an aglet. But it's also something we can think of when we're trying to explain what telomeres are. And, you think of when the shoelace tips begin to wear down, the shoelace starts to fray. Well, the same thing happens in our cells. As the telomeres shorten, we begin to age faster. And so the theory is that pregnancy-related hormone changes can help to preserve these telomeres and actually lead to a better overall health in the long run.
That was wild, and that's actually a really good description as well. Hey, speaking of hormones, the article also touches on how pregnancy later in life may help maintain cognitive function.
Yeah, I seem to recall that, though I wasn't pregnant. So a lot of stuff, I feel like it should be relating to me, but it mostly relates to the women. But yeah, estrogen and progesterone, which tend to surge in pregnancy, have been shown to have protective effects on the brain. And so some studies even suggest that women who become pregnant later in life and have children later in life have a lower risk of developing dementia or cognitive decline.
So I'm wondering, does this apply to fathers as well? Did you notice any cognitive benefits of having Liam?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Though, really, to be honest, all those sleepless nights and trying to kind of manage the early months probably balanced out any brain boost I might have had. But really, on a serious note, I do think that being an older parent does tend to keep you a little bit more mentally engaged. You're constantly learning, problem solving, adapting to your child's needs. I mean, I think of kids doing homework and stuff like that. It's forcing me back into things I learned over 40 years ago. At the time when they were probably learning, it was probably more like 30 years ago. But you get the point that you're challenging your brain a lot more because your kid's learning calculus. Well, I got to revisit all the calculus I learned in college, and stuff like that. So, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know you don't have kids yet, but do you see how engaging the brain a little bit more because you have kids that are going to be challenging, you have to think on things, can actually have a benefit to you?
Oh, totally. I mean, I'm not a parent yet, but I do work with youth a lot, and it's kind of a different world from when I grew up. So just kind of staying on top of things and really paying attention to the nonverbals, at least, just to be more social intelligent, because you can go up to a kid and you can say, "Hey, how's it going?" They react differently now than they did when I was growing up. I thought it's pretty easy to communicate with people, but for some reason with teenagers it can be kind of challenging. All you got to do though is you just got to, for me, what I've learned, a little pro tip is when they give you a one word answer, you kind of repeat it back. If you're like, "So how was your day?" They're like, "Good." "Oh, good. What do you mean by good?" And then they're like, "Well," and then they go into it. So it's like a new way of thinking and communicating. Plus the technology that they have is leaps and bounds from even when I was growing up. And so kind of staying on top of that in order to not get left behind. I know that's silly. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, it's been a technology to a certain extent, but it's, trying to manage the language and, all the little acronyms and things like that my daughter throws at me. And it's like, we used to talk in full sentences.
Yeah.
When I write a text message out, I punctuate because that's how I was raised. When you're communicating, you full sentence, proper punctuation, proper spelling. I spell check myself, and I get this stuff from my kids. It's like, what the heck is this? I got to try and think my way through the text message to try and understand what the heck they're trying to say to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's the language is really it really throws me off because sometimes just being a millennial, I know millennial slangs. I even know Gen X and Boomer slang. But this new generation, they're speaking English, but it sounds like it's a different language sometimes, and it's hard to connect. But it's fun. It's fun to do. Well, parenting at my age is, I'm assuming it's going to be mentally stimulating, but I can see how it could be especially beneficial later in life when keeping your brain active is so important.
Yeah, and another interesting point that the article makes is that children born to older mothers tend to have fewer behavioral problems. And that might be due to kind of more increased emotional maturity, patience, and life experience that often comes with age. But from my experience, though, I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
That makes sense. I imagine an older parent might have also more financial stability, which could reduce the stress and create more of a secure environment for their children.
Yeah, I'm mixed on that. Because and part of it is the economy has changed so much. And, when we got a daughter who's preparing for college in another year, and we've looked at how much college tuition has really gone up. And, from a financial standpoint, yeah, in theory, you should be more financially stable coming into that point. But for a lot of parents now, there's been a lot of, financial changes. People, losing jobs later in life, changing, moving. When Pam and I got married, economy was actually pretty good. She did well selling her place in DC as we, moved out to Western Michigan. And, we were able to buy pretty good housing prices. But then, we had a change when we moved out here. It was right at the bubble, when everything kind of busted. And so, we didn't make as much money kind of selling the house in Michigan to move out here, but fortunately we were able to buy here at a much lower price. If you look at it now, the prices of housings have almost doubled
Yeah.
in the about 16 years that we've been here. And so,
Yep.
yeah, there's greater I think there's overall going to be greater stability. There's, you're generally in a career, um, you know, and I think when you're looking at your 30s, 40s, that's probably the most financially secure period of time. Whereas you kind of get into the 50s, you start working toward retirement, it may be a little bit more challenging because now, not only are you looking at the expenses of college, but you're also looking at, okay, if I retire, I have to manage living on a lower income plus pay for college. And so there can be some challenges with it, but I think overall, our ability to deal with the stresses of finances tend to be a little bit better as we're older. We also have a greater likelihood of being a bit more stable. We should have more savings. And I think that's one of the key points in there is that, as people are preparing to have children a little bit later in life, they should be preparing for that financial burden that it will be. And there's a
Yeah.
better opportunity to be more prepared. Whereas if you're in your 20s, when my parents were married, they had my oldest sister at 19. They didn't exactly they hadn't finished college and they didn't have quite the finances that I was able to have, going into marriage and into having kids.
Right.
So financial security, it can make a huge difference in parenting when you're not having to worry about constantly having to worry about making ends meet. You can be a little bit more present and focused on your child's development. And so it can be, I think, a reasonably good benefit to being older and being more financially stable as you go to have children.
Yeah. Another thing is when an individual is having children at an older age, they're already grown as a person. They're already more mature, right? So, for example, my parents had me at a fairly young age, early 20s. And I think about, man, if I had kids around the time that they had me, I might mess those kids up because I myself was figuring out who I was and I was going through life and trying to figure out life. And so I think that also plays a role is you if you just make this decision to have kids when you're older, you've already figured things out. Well, for the most part, right? Anyways.
Well, I don't know about having things figured out per se. Life, I don't think we ever really figure out life. It is an important discussion to have, as you are starting to prepare to have kids. Who do you want to be? Who are you becoming? Are you ready to have kids? And one of the biggest concerns is that there is a increased risk of complications during pregnancy. And those can be things like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, there's also a slightly higher chance, as I mentioned earlier, of birth defects, Down syndrome, and even just birth defects in general. That's why it's crucial for women who are considering having children later in life to really work closely with their doctors.
Yeah, and I imagine that staying in good physical health plays a major role in managing those risks.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just thinking of the risk of gestational diabetes, if you are more fit and active, you're going to have, better insulin sensitivity. And so, you're less likely to have gestational diabetes. And we know that, women who have gestational diabetes have an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes later in life. Being more fit can minimize that risk to a certain extent. There's, obviously, just being in better muscular shape prepares the muscles for both carrying the baby as well as delivering the baby. better cardiovascular health. All these things can contribute to just a better overall pregnancy, same as it would for a younger individual. But if we consider that most individuals aging are declining somewhat physically, then we have to consider that, okay, if we have declined physically, then that puts us at greater risks during that pregnancy. And so staying in better shape leading into the pregnancy is going to be much better for both the mother and the child. And that's where the 6 pillars of aging well come in. Exercise, healthy diet, maintaining a healthy body composition, sleep hygiene, avoiding smoking, and purposeful social connection. These are all crucial factors for a healthy pregnancy and for staying energized as a parent. I mean, not only as a parent, but as an aging individual.
That's great advice, honestly. And that also applies to younger parents as well. But let's flip the perspective for a bit. From your experience, what are some of the unexpected joys of having a child later in life?
That's a really great question. And for me, one of the biggest joys is the level of appreciation I have for parenting. At 40, I felt much more present and aware of how precious the experience was. I also had more life experience. And so that really helped me to kind of stay patient and keep things in perspective. To be honest, I'm not sure how well I've done that in terms of staying patient and keeping all these things in perspective. But I imagine how much worse I would have been as a parent if I was 20 years younger. And so all the things that I've screwed up being a more mature parent, I can only imagine that I would have messed it up a lot worse being a younger parent.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about one of the benefits of having children at a later age in life is you yourself have figured out a lot of things in life. You figured out who you are, you figured out how to deal with your emotions, you figured out all these things, and it's cool because you can pass that information on to your children instead of figuring all that out while simultaneously raising children as well.
Yeah. So I mean it's great that we can bring that experience, that wisdom, that knowledge into parenting that can help us to hopefully be a little bit better. We also have experienced a lot more, so as I'm dealing with my kids either starting into college, planning for college, or in Liam's case, he's midway through college and trying to plan careers. I am further along in the career. I've made some of the mistakes. It's like, like for example, Liam is considering, well, he's majoring in English and literature, and I think he's leaning into being a professor, which kind of like, oh, dude, really? Is that what you want to do? Did you not learn from my life? But so I've at least experienced things. Whereas, if you're just starting off on your career and you have kids, you don't have quite that same level of experience as they're maturing and going through, because they're not that far removed from where you were in life. And so, yeah, I think it's good to have that experience and to be a bit more patient, be more perceptive, be a bit more retrospective in terms of your parenting abilities.
Well, that should also be flattering that he's making that choice to follow in your footsteps. As a dad, I assume a little bit of you is probably, flattered.
I don't know about that.
All right. Well, regardless, this has really been inspiring to hear. And from a longevity standpoint, having kids later might actually encourage people to take better care of themselves so they can keep up with their children.
Yeah, I'm very competitive even with my kids. So having children later in life kind of gives you a real incentive to stay healthy and fit, because you want to be there for them as they grow up, and you want to push them to be in shape as well. And so you want to be that example to them. For a lot of parents that are younger, they're kind of becoming grandparents in their 40s and 50s. And so for them, it's kind of regaining that fitness so they can keep up with the grandkids. But they also know that they can hand the grandkids back to the parents and go and recover. So they come and visit for a weekend. They might get exhausted from playing with the kids for that period of time, but then they go and relax. As a parent, you don't have that vacation time. You don't have that time to hand I mean, yeah, you can get a few hours here and there going off on a date night or whatever, or you can, go on a vacation without the kids. My parents did that many times. Pam and I have rarely done it, but, as an older parent, you need to be in better shape to be able to keep up with these kids. And it's been incentive for me. I mean, I look at, kids that my kids associate with and their parents. And, there's a certain part of me that's like, yeah, I'm 60 now and I'm in better shape than these younger parents. And it is a bit of an incentive to just kind of keep up at it, keep with it, and keep aging well with it.
Yeah, that's it. Nailed it. I think that those words, whoever's listening to this, I think that's pretty encouraging. So for our listeners who might be considering having children later in life, what is your advice?
Well, my advice would be first to focus on your health. Do your research, make sure that you have a good support system in place. And really, most important is to trust your instincts. Every family's journey is going to be different, and there are no right or wrong ways. There's no single right time to have kids. So plan when it is best for you. Evaluate your life. Look at where am I financially? Where am I physically? Where am I geographically? Is this where I plan to want to raise kids? Maybe you've taken a job early in life and it takes you to New York City and you're like, okay, I'm going to work here for a while, but my goal is to go somewhere else. When I was in my, how old was I? I guess I was just shortly after college. So I was probably in my later 20s. I took a job in New York and I had no intention of staying in New York. My goal was to be there about a year or so and then go back. And then I spent a little bit longer than I anticipated there, but I don't know that I would have wanted to have raised a family there. But the plan was always, I can financially improve my situation and then go and start a family.
Well said. And for our listeners who want to dive deeper into this topic, we'll include a link to the article in our show notes.
Yeah, so I think this has been a great conversation. It was surprising to me when Pam shared the article that, there are health benefits that go along with being older parents. We generally tend to focus on the risks, but it really appears that there is an advantage, maybe not to waiting into the 40s as I did, but, looking at, the trend in society today to be kind of waiting into early 30s, mid 30s before really starting to have kids instead of in their 20s, as much of my generation, my parents' generation had done, waiting until maybe the latter part of that, fourth decade of life and have your kids a little bit later when you're more financially secure. But in planning that, plan for your financial fitness, your physical fitness, but also be focused on your mental health as well. And I think, giving out another shout out to Jay with the SPIES, I think the SPIES is something that we develop a little bit more with maturity. And I think that can add to our ability to be better parents when we are more spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially well-centered.
Yeah.
And so those are things to consider. And, it doesn't matter when you decide to have kids or whether you decide to have kids. Some of our listeners might like, I have no desire to have kids. Or, we have listeners who maybe for whatever reasons cannot have children. And that's okay as well. It's like there's no right or wrongs when it comes to when and whether to have kids. The key is, just whether you're having kids, not having kids, just keep aging well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.